You know, you're living in a state of total lawlessness when criminals start pulling off heists that, under normal circumstances, they don't even attempt. Think of the train robberies in the Wild West with Butch Cassidy, where they detach the rail car and dynamite the safe and so on. Brazen crimes like this only happen when law enforcement isn't doing its job for one reason or another. Otherwise, the risk of getting caught is just too high, so the thieves don't even try. Now, post-BLM, there's been a lot of coverage of crime rates increasing as police retreat and criminals become emboldened. But there hasn't been much coverage of the dramatic increase in one specific kind of crime, which used to be relatively rare. I'm talking about the theft of catalytic converters. Stealing catalytic converters doesn't take very long, but it's highly conspicuous. Thieves typically slide under cars and then start sawing, or they lift cars for easier access. In either case, it's a loud and very noticeable process. It's brazen. It's definitely not the kind of thing you'd try if you thought there might be any police officers around. But there aren't many police officers left in major cities in this country, which is why thefts of catalytic converters have skyrocketed. To give just one prominent example, in the city of Los Angeles from 2018 to 2023, the number of catalytic converter thefts per year has increased by more than 720%. Put another way, Los Angeles went from having 970 catalytic converters stolen every year to more than 8,000 stolen every year. And the numbers are similar in many other major cities. Nationally, catalytic converter thefts jumped by more than 900% from 2019 to 2023. Thieves want these converters because they have precious metals that they can sell for hundreds of dollars. And now that they know that police aren't interested in stopping them, they're just lifting cars in the middle of the street and removing the converters. And that's what happened in the early hours of Saturday morning to actor Johnny Wactor, who was a regular in the show General Hospital for 2 years. He also appeared in the show Westworld. Around 3 a.m., Wactor and a coworker were leaving a rooftop bar in downtown Los Angeles where Wactor served as a bartender. And that's when Wactor noticed that 3 individuals had raised his Toyota Prius with a floor lift, and he initially suspected that his vehicle was being towed. And by the way, thieves target Priuses and other hybrids because their catalytic converters have a higher concentration of precious metals than gas cars, makes them more valuable. But when Wactor confronted the group, according to police, he was shot. Quote, without provocation, the men fled and Wactor died shortly afterwards. Watch.
The brother of beloved soap opera star Johnny Wactor tells us the 37-year-old was shot to death in downtown LA early Saturday morning, killed while trying to stop a catalytic converter theft in progress.
He, I guess, was seeing them do it in the act and was standing up for what he believed was right and, protecting his vehicle and his car, and he was being brave, and you never anticipate someone would kill someone for that.
Tessa Farrell says Wactor was her friend and former fiance, that he moved to LA from South Carolina to follow his dreams and accomplish them as a main character named Brando Corbin on General Hospital, where he filmed 164 episodes between 2020 and 2022. The LAPD says investigators are still searching for 3 male suspects in connection with the fatal shooting. And right now, they're not releasing a description of them or how they got away. But Tessa says Wactor's co-workers at a downtown LA bar were witnesses to the attack. She says she hopes this killing shines a light on violent crime occurring in LA.
So I will actually always think of him as this spirit that loved to celebrate life and be alive and push the limits of experience he was an amazing actor. He was really funny.
Now, the woman you just saw, Tessa Farrell, is Wactor's ex-fiance. In a video she posted to TikTok on Monday, Farrell states that she hadn't seen Wactor in a few years prior to his death. She also indicates that she hasn't been talking to him lately because she's been busy working on a movie. She then goes into some detail about their relationship, how much she cared about him. But as the video goes on, Farrell reveals how little she understands about what happened to Wactor and about violent crime in general. And before I show you the rest of the footage, I want to make it very clear that my intention is not to mock a woman who's grieving, obviously. The point here is not to demean Tessa Farrell in any way, but the fact remains that the ideas she promotes in this video must be addressed because they are a cancer on society that has cost many people their lives and will continue to cost people their lives unless these ideas are rejected. So with that in mind, here's the rest of Tessa Farrell's video. Watch.
It's not okay. This can't keep happening. So many lives are being lost to just us not being smart. We have to be smarter as a community. And guys, even if you're watching this, we have to stop being so mean to each other. Like, I saw some of the comments yesterday, and it's like, guys, let's love each other. Let's not steal, you know. Johnny's up above now, looking down, and I'm so happy that I think he found happiness before he went, because that was his dream in life, is to be happy. But I'm just so proud of the man he's become, and it's so sad that crime in LA had to do this, and I'm hoping that change some legislation to prevent this from happening. These criminals can't keep being on the street, and they can't keep being sent back and have no repercussions for their actions, you know. The person who did this, if you're watching, I'm sorry, but you shot the wrong guy. You know, you can get a real job. Like, I know the job market's hard, but we're all in it together. You don't have to steal. You know? And especially take a life over it, like, human life is disregarded too easy, guys. We gotta make some changes as a community. We gotta support each other and come together. Maybe that's what Johnny's gift is for us. Maybe he's gifting that to all of us. Because he was full of gifts.
Okay, now, so there's the video. And as I said, the point here is not to, criticize this young woman. I mean, there are aspects of this that are some kind of strange. The line about you shot the wrong guy is a really weird thing to say. It just is. I don't know what do you mean, shot the wrong guy? She also, she hasn't, according to her own testimony, hasn't even talked to the guy in years. And yet she's the main one on TV and now doing videos talking about this. So there's some aspects of it that are kind of strange, but that's not really the point. We can't see inside her heart to know what her motivations are. The attitude on display here, though, is deeply sick, yet it's also entirely pervasive. She implores the criminals who just murdered a loved one, I guess, to stop being so mean and to love each other and not steal. She acknowledges that the job market is hard, but she says, oh, well, they don't have to steal. We're all in this together, she says, to the guys who just shot Johnny Wactor. We need to support each other. So violent thugs have been allowed to take over our communities precisely because of this just utterly delusional liberal approach to crime. And if Tessa were just one naive woman crying out in the wilderness or in her bathtub, as the case may be, again, for whatever reason, then this wouldn't be worth responding to. But she's one of millions of people saying this. Again, this attitude is why lawlessness has claimed hold of so many communities. People with this view elect people who have the same view, or at least who express the same view, and those people usher in more chaos and criminality, and the cycle repeats over and over again while thousands more fall victim to these crimes. So we have to address it and be honest about it. And being honest about it means this, because here's the reality that these people just can't wrap their minds around. Okay, these criminals cannot be redeemed with a lecture about the value of teamwork. They're not committing crime because they're poor and desperate. And I want to say that again. They are not committing crime because they're poor and desperate. The job market has nothing to do with it at all. Okay, they steal and kill because they enjoy it. They want to do it, so they do. Mike Cernovich put it succinctly on Twitter yesterday when he tweeted, "Criminals like crime." It sounds overly simplified. It's not. It really is as simple as that. They like it. They do it because they like it. They act this way because they want to. Okay, you take anyone in America right now who's currently stealing a catalytic converter from a car. I don't care who they are. Take that person, hand them $1 million, and say, your life has changed. Here's $1 million. You don't have to do this anymore. They'll be back on the street committing petty and not so petty crimes by next week, probably by tomorrow, okay? You could give them a high-paying job in a corner office downtown. They'd never even show up for work, not a single day. They'd rather be on the street stealing pieces from people's cars to sell for drug money. Now, there are observable reasons for this, and one of the major ones, though certainly not the only one, But one of the major ones is simple. People with high IQs tend to be more empathetic because they have the intellectual capacity to consider what other people might be thinking or feeling. Okay, we think of empathy as an emotion, but it's also an intellectual exercise. People with very low IQs often have little or no empathy. A few years ago, there was a study published in the journal Psychological Science that came up with a finding along these lines. And as the New Haven Register reported at the time, one of the psychologists behind the story remarked, quote, "There may be cognitive limits in the ability to take the perspective of others into account." In other words, the less intelligent you are, the harder it may be for you to put yourself in another's shoes. So with that in mind, guess where criminals who steal catalytic converters rank on the IQ spectrum? We can assume it's not very high. In fact, we don't have to assume because based on the data we have, chronic adult offenders have an average IQ of around 85, which is a full standard deviation below the population's average. In other words, the people committing much of the crime in this country are very stupid. They're often so stupid they don't feel empathy, at least not to the degree that normal people do. It's not that they're psychopaths, although that's certainly true in some cases. It's that by and large, they're like morons. There's no reasoning with them because they don't care what you think. And they don't even like the idea that they should think about someone else as another human being and put themselves in their shoes and all. They don't do that. They don't care. And this is not an excuse for them. It's not remotely an excuse. I'm just trying to explain that there are deep-seated problems here, and poverty and desperation have not nearly as much to do with it as people think. And of course, the other major factor, even more significant, is that many of these criminals were raised in homes without any parental guidance, where there was no effort put into their moral formation. After all, even if you are low IQ, that doesn't mean that you have to become a violent criminal. Being raised correctly, no matter how smart you are, can guard against that sort of outcome pretty effectively. But these people were not raised correctly or raised at all, really. And so here we are. But all these factors together create a very disturbing situation. The lack of moral guidance, the lack of proper adult supervision growing up, the lack of spiritual formation, the lack of intellect, all together mean that no matter what Tessa Farrell says to these people, it won't matter. Now, she understands the concept of empathy. They don't. She doesn't really understand human nature. That's one of the problems, and that's why everything she says in that video is pointless. It's also why every politician's effort to rehabilitate these people is a waste of time. They quite literally don't even know what rehabilitation means, and that's why the only thing you can do with them is remove them from society, put them in prison, lock them away. It's the only thing. It's the only thing that can be done. Now, is it possible for these sorts of people to be redeemed? The type who casually kill another human being after stealing from his car? The sort of person who would kill somebody over a catalytic converter? Can that person be redeemed? Well, as a Christian, I have to believe that they can as a matter of faith. But it takes a supernatural intervention to bring that about. And the simple fact of the matter is that the vast majority of violent criminals will never be functional members of society ever in their lives. That's a fact, whether we like it or not. Which is why our only choice is to lock them away forever and let God be the judge at the end. That's not for us to do. But we can make judgments about them in this life. We have to. And one of the judgments is, you are a dangerous, dysfunctional person. We cannot live around you. Now, even leftist politicians understand this to some extent, which is why they never blame criminals for their own actions. They find others to blame, sometimes to comical effect. A year ago, there was a video of a Los Angeles city councilwoman named Nithya Raman that made the rounds, and she was announcing her decision to vote against a measure that would have, quote, made it unlawful for any person to possess a detached catalytic converter unless valid documentation or other proof of lawful possession can be produced. The point of the measure, obviously, is to help prevent the kinds of thefts that led to the death of Johnny Wactor. Ultimately, the measure passed, but before it did, Raman explained why she opposed it. She said that Toyota was responsible for the thefts of catalytic converters, not the thieves, because they made the catalytic converters too easy to steal. So it's their fault. Watch.
We have a company, the Prius, Toyota, who makes the Prius, that essentially has a device on their cars, which is super easy to remove, It's basically the value of a MacBook, right? That is put in a place that is incredibly easy to access in your car. And then the thefts related to this issue have essentially all of the costs of that are given to us to bear instead of them having to manufacture a car that actually is not so easy to be stolen.
So the government requires car manufacturers to place catalytic converters on cars with the Clean Air Act. And now the government blames car manufacturers for making these converters too easy to steal. Now, to be fair, it's true that a lot of cars have their catalytic converters in the engine bay now where they're less accessible to thieves. But the reason these thefts have increased in the last 6 years has nothing to do with their placement on vehicles. If it did, the thefts will be declining, not increasing, as more manufacturers place the converters in the engine bay. The reason these thefts are skyrocketing is that the police have stopped enforcing the law and DAs have stopped prosecuting crime. Rather than admit that, Los Angeles politicians are blaming car manufacturers. These are the lengths that leftists in Los Angeles will go in order to absolve criminals of responsibility for their own actions. They'd rather blame Toyota than hire more police to prevent these crimes, which are brazen in pretty much every case. And the family and friends of the victim, in turn, are hopelessly confused about why their loved one is dead. And by the way, whether you think these criminals are responsible for their actions or not, it actually shouldn't even matter. Like, you could make the argument that if most of these criminals are low IQ, they were raised in dysfunctional, neglectful homes, then to some extent, it isn't their fault they turned out the way they did. You could say that, hey, if I was in the exact same situation, maybe I'd be out stealing catalytic converters too. Maybe. Now, I think the argument only goes so far. Ultimately, we have free will. We all make choices, and we should be held accountable for them. But it actually doesn't matter. It's all academic because either way, the violent criminals must be removed from society. And in fact, I would argue that if they are indeed not responsible for their actions, that's all the more reason to remove them because it means all the more that they probably can't be rehabilitated. So this is usually how it goes after a senseless murder. It's exactly what you saw in that video. We hear from friends and family calling on the community to come together. Sometimes they advocate on behalf of the murderer, telling us to be understanding and forgiving of the scumbag who murdered their loved one. We see this kind of thing all the time. Well, you know, as important as forgiveness is, just once I'd like to see someone in that situation calling for justice and punishment, like showing real righteous anger. I'd like to hear something like this. This criminal killed somebody I love. I hope that he's brought to justice and that justice is swift and severe. I want him punished severely. I want him removed from society. That's what I want. That's a much healthier response. And it would actually solve the problem too, because a very small percentage of the population is responsible for an overwhelming amount of violent crime. But you rarely hear anyone talking about that anymore. The people committing these crimes don't understand much, but they understand exactly what's happening right now in cities like Los Angeles. And at the expense of innocent men like Johnny Wactor, they're taking full advantage of the opportunity. Thanks for checking out this video. If you'd like to listen to my full podcast on the go, you can check out The Matt Walsh Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.